you were wondering about the title, so I couldn't resist, putting in this dispositional phrase. So is it solvable? But I won't immerse it into water. So, okay. So the metaphysics of induction. It's really such an exciting thought to kind of say something about induction from the perspective of metaphysics. I start with the inductive inference, and I think that this is really kind of a very easy. If we talk about the problem of induction, we normally mean enumerative induction, and and the thing is that we kind of infer from a limited regularity to a universal regularity. That's what's done here. And as Hume says, what we have to presuppose is the often cited uniformity principle, which says that nature develops and is everywhere and at every time the same. Now, what if we could argue independently for the truth of the uniformity principle? That would be a metaphysical solution to the problem. If we could have metaphysical arguments for why the uniformity principle is true, I think, and that's the basic idea behind looking for metaphysical solution of the problem of induction. Now, dispositionalism seems to be a good candidate here because it gives us robust, natural necessity. At least that's its aim. So that's what it aims at and what its mission is, kind of. And one question would be behind the talk also, does dispositional really is it successful in providing this kind of robust natural necessity? And it needs on top, I think, kind of an appropriate theory of universals to do that. I think, but that's pretty common sense, I think. There are some trope theories, dispositional trope theories also attend, but they turned out to be kind of very complicated, and nobody goes into this project any longer. So you need also universals, and and this last point here is I think also in the end connected to the Goodman problem, in the Goodman riddle in the end, but I'm not sure whether it really helps. Okay, now but what are the prospects here? And I quote here Gerhard Schurz out of his really good book, Hume's Problem Solved is the title. And he says that there have been several attempts in the analytic philosophy of the 20th century to find possible or improved ways of justifying induction. None of these attempts have been successful. So so the prospects kind of are fairly dim. At least, he himself thinks that, he did something good to the problem of induction, and I would say a little more about that later. But, I could give a glimpse probably. What he does is solving the problem, the epistemic problem of induction. So basically, it's an epistemic solution to the problem of induction, not a metaphysical one. I think he would say that's crazy, actually. But, we don't have to take his view. Now, the aim of my talk is to supply a landscape to advance the topic and probably find possible solutions and explore difficulties and problems of those possible solutions, and sort of the best candidate here. Now, the issues I want to tackle is, can a dispositional theory of laws of nature justify inductive inference? The idea here would, to argue for the truth of the regularity principle, the uniformity principle from a dispositionalist perspective. And the second issue would be, is a dispositional justification of inductive inference desirable in the end? So does it really, are there good, is the prospect good that it can do the trick? Now, the structure of my talk is as follows. I will say something about the problem of induction to get clearer about what we have to do. And then I will deal with a dispositional theory of laws and what resources it has for supplying a solution to the problem. And then I will deal with a specific problem that a dispositional theory faces, namely the so-called inference problem, which is a very close relative to the problem of induction. And it basically, the result of that will be to say that it's the specific Birdian account of dispositionalism that is faced by this problem. But I will, kind of be a bit sketchy here, but say something more about what dispositionalism should care about in figuring out its theory, not to, to fall back to this problem. Okay, then we need to know that dispositionalism is true in the end. If dispositionalism is just, a metaphysical hypothesis, then the uniformity principle isn't provided. So there's not enough, strength here to really help us with induction. So how can we know that dispositional theory of laws is true? And I will be dealing then with two main problems that I see here and draw some consequences. Okay, now the problem of induction, very well known. I'm not telling you anything new. It's induction here in the narrow sense. It's kind of the enumerative induction, not in the broad sense as saying about anything about non-deductive inferences here. So inductive inference looks as follows, and as so I won't do anything with the former things, it's just illustrative. Now we draw an inference from a limited regularity to the universal regularity, and we have to presuppose the uniformity principle, which says, according to Hume, if reason determined us, it would proceed upon that principle that instances of which we have had no experience must resemble those of which we have had experience, and that the course of nature continues always uniformly the same. So this is the uniformity principle here, the metaphysical uniformity principle, that nature continues always uniformly the same. Now, the problem of induction has several levels to it. So there's the logical problem of the validity of the inference. There's the metaphysical dimension, which is about the truth of the uniformity principle and the truth of the regularities and the laws. And there's the epistemic problem, whether the regularities or the laws are knowable to us, whether we can know them. And we have to distinguish between two levels: the specific level concerning specific regularities, specific laws, and the general level. Are there regularities at all? Are there laws of nature at all? And if we are dealing with metaphysical solutions of the problem, we are, of course, not dealing with a specific level, whether are there specific laws, specific regularities, but we are dealing with this level, with the general level. Are there regularities at all? Are there laws of nature at all? Now, you could have different views with respect to the relation between the metaphysical and the epistemic dimension here, and I think probably that is kind of important for discussing the problem in the end. So, one thing is, can we know that this ordered pair F and G, the two properties, the two universals, is a regularity or a law such that there is a regularity Fg, or the law that Fg is a kind of ordered thing? And the second thing is, can we know that there are the regularities or laws at all? Now you could say that we can have knowledge in the sense of two, in the universal sense, only if we have knowledge in the sense of one. So only if we know that there are examples, specific examples of regularities, we can know that the universal case is true. But you could also hold that that we have good reasons to believe that there are laws or regularities, but also believe that we cannot have knowledge in the sense of one, or at least we don't have it yet. So you could think that, you know, there are good reasons to believe that there are such things as laws, and we have good reasons, it's rational to believe in the existence of regularities and laws, but you know, up to now we don't probably know whether, you know, this and that really is a regularity or law. So we might think, you know, this is something up to science to find the specific regularities, and the more broad metaphysical picture, that's something for, you know, hardcore metaphysical realists. Now, I face you with a well-known trilemma that Hume has risen. So he thinks that the problem of induction is connected to this trilemma. So there can't be an a priori solution because causation is not conceptual relation. Because, you know, there's nothing, according to Hume, in the concept of the cause that makes us feel that is necessarily linked to its effect, and so so there's no a priori solution according to Hume. According to Hume, there's also no empirical solution by direct experience. It's impossible to have direct experience of necessity according to Hume, and that's why we can't know that there is why there's no empirical solution. And there's also no empirical solution by inference from experience, because the problem of circularity, because we have to presuppose the uniformity principle. Okay, now finding a solution, here are some possible alternatives you have. What could you do? You could tackle one horn of the trilemma. You could argue against the trilemma as such. You could say, oh, you know, Hume has forgotten one, you know, fourth alternative here, and that does the trick. And you could avoid induction, find some other method. Now, here are some traditional solutions to the problem of induction. Here, what I call Kant's solution, and there's of course, in Kant's scholarship, there is a wide discussion whether Kant really wanted to solve the problem of induction or whether he wouldn't. So, as in Kant research, everything is kind of questionable, and this also. So, don't take that for, you know, adamant. But you know, I basically think that he wanted to solve Hume's problem of induction. I think it's really fundamental for his transcendental philosophy, I think. Okay, so he tackled the first horn and said, you know, there's something a priori here which helps us, at least. And so he tackled the first horn, and by showing that the principle of causation is synthetic a priori. So that Hume was wrong concerning his claim that that causation is a posteriori. And I think what one needs to do here is to justify the objective validity of the categories, that at least what he did, and with respect to causation and necessity. The other thing which is needed is that for giving a Kantian solution is introduce guiding a priori ideas, and I like to interpret them as kind of models, basic models that help us conceptualizing nature and guiding inquiry. Now, the common view of this solution is it's not really desirable for us because, you know, we have to buy into the whole machinery of transcendental idealism, and it simply has too strong prior presumptions. So it's unattractive if you really don't want to be a transcendental idealist, and only kind of probably few people would like to be that today. Okay, so that doesn't seem to be maybe not such an attractive solution, but you know, I come back to that in the end. So you could also tackle the second horn of the trilemma and argue for direct experience of necessity. And that's something that Schopenhauer, for instance, did in his philosophy of the will, you know, where a very central aim was to say, you know, in feeling my will, I feel necessity. I feel how I'm necessitated by my will, you know, and I feel the power of my will. There is a very dear colleague of mine in my research group on inductive metaphysics, Markus Schrenk, and he has this weird idea actually. He thinks that it's not the will, so he likes Schopenhauer and the will, but it's the resistance of the world is his thought. You know, if I suddenly feel the desire to leave this room, and I think, you know, crossing the door is kind of boring, why not go through this wall here? You know, I just go through this one here. And so if I'm a Humean, I might say, you know, I just try. You know, anything could happen, so I go for it. But Markus Schrenk says, you know, it's clear that, you know, if I do it, you know, I will hurt myself, and I will feel the powers or the things there that stop me from doing it. So at least that's his idea, and you know, he wasn't really successful in pushing this point in our research group. So he wanted to have some project here, but people didn't like it. You know, you can't say much more about it. That's a problem. Okay. So the fundamental problem here are the counterfactuals. I think that you need much more necessity here, which is bound to the counterfactual counterfactual conditionals. And what you get is kind of the powers, the factual powers here and there, but not the counterfactuals. Maybe that's the kind of good thing to say. What most people might don't like about this idea. Okay, now you could also tackle the third horn, which is the mentioned solution by Gerhard Schurz in his book Hume's Problem Solved, and he tackles the third horn in saying, you know, we do have he solves it by meta-induction, and he says, you know, we do have successful procedures in drawing good conclusions, good inductive inferences in the sciences. So I can justify inductive inference by meta-induction, and he does so with the resources of the optimality of inductive inference via machine learning. So the idea is to say, relying on induction is better, is optimal than not relying on inductive inference, and showing that by procedures of machine learning. So if we train machines to draw inductive inferences, we can show that, that their inferences are really very reliable, and that's how he thinks about it. So what he does is to make an application of induction to competing prediction methods. There's another way of tackling the problem by simply, circumventing it. And Popper's method of falsification can be seen in this tradition. So you could think, why, I don't get to the laws of nature by any methodological procedure. I just come up with something as an hypothesis, wherever I got it from, whether I, had slept well and dreamt of something, doesn't play any role. I come up with something, and then I go through the method of falsification, and by falsification I show that it is a reliable hypothesis. Now there is a problem here with Popper's method. There's no guide of inquiry here, and it's in much of science. Actually, we do perform inductive inference to get at something, or we do something. We need some guiding principles, some guiding ideas to arrive at hypotheses. So there are these nice examples where there's no procedure that gets us to the law-like hypothesis, but they're kind of really rare. So in most cases, we need some method, and Popper doesn't give us much here in his way. So, okay. Now, a different strategy would be the metaphysical grounding of the metaphysical uniformity principle. We have this picture that we already know, and now we could do the following, and it's also so finding a way around inductive inference by induction, by abductive inference. We think that limited regularities are a fact that are in need of explanation. So yeah, there are these, every day I simply do rely on regularities. As I said, I like this example of my other colleague in our research group, Andreas Hüttemann, my coffee machine. If I'm a Humean, I don't have any reason to believe that my coffee machine will give me coffee at the end of the process. It's just, I would be completely, it would be a surprise for me in the end if I see, it gives me coffee, that's great. Or as a Humean, you always have to be afraid in stepping inside an airplane. And things like that. So, there are these regularities, and they simply are, as a matter of fact, reliable. And we need that. No, and this is a fact which is a need of explanation. Okay. And if we do that and we make an abductive inference here, we could say, yeah, there are these necessary laws that ground those, that give us those regularities, and okay, it's a non-deductive, it's an inductive inference. So there's only some degree of probability here, but that's at least something. So we could conclude there are necessary laws. We just it's a hypothesis, but it's it can be well justified in a way, if the regularities are good. And, as far as we know, they are quite reliable. Now, okay, and if I have the general claim, you know, there must be, there must be laws of nature, even if we don't know them. You know, I could say that the metaphysical uniformity principle is probably, to a high degree, it seems to be true. You know, and then, you know, I transgress the inductive inference in this manner. Okay, what I then, of course, need to strengthen the hypothesis is I need an inference to the best explanation here to give the push of my metaphysical theory in a way. And that's what my previous speaker was heading at, in a way, to, you know, finding here some arguments for which accounts might be best to do the trick. Now, Lewis' solution is in a way tackling the first horn in a way, because, you know, his metaphysics is kind of an a priori enterprise, and, you know, saying, you know, there's this, you know, it's a kind of a speculative metaphysical account, actually. I just go for it, explain the regularities by saying that there's this mosaic, and, you know, in the end it will turn out that we do have a best theory and everything. But on the other hand, the best system account is also kind of a substitute. So he kind of goes also for an inference to the best explanation here and circumvents the problem of induction. Now, concerning the problem of induction, at least in my view, a problem for Lewis would be so finding a solution to give the best system, one criterion is the fit to the phenomena. So this is one theoretical virtue that a theory has to conform to in order to be the best theory, or to give the best explanation. And this fit to the phenomena here seems to me, at least, kind of really a huge problem with induction. And so, you know, it could turn out that the best system is really extremely broad, so it's really not attaching to the phenomena really closely. And in the end, I think that the best system account is simply too Humean to solve Hume's problem. So I think it's simply not supplying us with a reliable kind of. It supplies us with laws, but it doesn't kind of supply us with the explanation of what we initially started with, explaining the regularities and do this transgression of induction. So still, you know, it would be totally fine to try to go through this wall, actually. Now, you know, I could go here into more detail why this solution seems to be not very good. But let's try the anti-Humean solutions. And there very clearly are circumventing solutions. I don't go into detail here with Armstrong's DTA theory, which, you were talking enough about that, I think. But here's a quote by Armstrong, which gives you a hint that he really, had the idea, maybe that does something on the problem of induction. So he says that with universals, the possibility arises of construing laws as relationships between universals. In this conception of laws, the having of certain properties by a particular or particulars brings about or has a certain probability of bringing about a further state of affairs of a certain sort, the bringing about occurring in virtue of the antecedent properties. This is a very natural way to conceive of the operation of laws and brings with it advantages, including some progress with the problem of induction. But you know, he, as far as I know, he didn't deal in detail with how and to which degree this makes progress on the problem of induction. So now the other anti-Humean strategy. Oh yes, I have to say something about the problems here. I think that the DTA theory has two problems. One is that it says that the laws are contingent. So it's a fact that F and G are connected via the necessitation relation. And it's a very important fact because he wants to have independence also. That's an important idea of his. So he can't give on independence that F and G are as such independent of each other, and that an additional thing has to be instantiated, namely the N relation, in order to give us a law-like relation between F and G. This idea of his gives rise to the so-called inference problem. The inference problem with which I will be dealing later with dispositionalism, because I think correctly has been risen towards Birdian dispositionalism in the same way, actually. Now, okay, so Armstrong's or the DTA theory is afflicted with problems here and might not be able to give us enough necessity to ground the metaphysical uniformity principle. Now, dispositionalism. It seems to be a better candidate because it kind of has a stronger necessity here. It takes dispositional properties as causal powers, which bring about the regular behavior of things in nature, and hence ground the necessity of laws of nature in a really strict and robust way. Now, is dispositionalism a good candidate to solve the problem of induction then? Now, dispositionalism is a theory about the nature of properties and laws of nature. And I'm very brief here because you seem to be very familiar with the theory as a whole. So dispositions are structured intrinsically modal properties. They have an intrinsic directionality. They are directed towards their manifestations, such that a certain disposition brings about a very certain manifestation. And it lies within the nature of this property to give rise to this certain behavior. And here's the simple conditional analysis. We had that already, which illustrates what a disposition is meant to be. It's a property that manifests under certain stimulus or certain other conditions. Now, dispositional essentialism, I think you also gave the quote by Bird, I think. So Bird says, according to dispositional essentialism, the real essence of some potency P includes a disposition to give some particular characteristic manifestation M in response to a characteristic stimulus S. Hence, in all possible worlds, any object that possesses P is disposed to yield M in response to S. So we have really strict necessity here, necessity concerning a certain behavior given that a certain object instantiates this property. Okay, now let's take that. If this is the case, then the laws, as Bird says, simply drop out of the dispositional natures of those potencies. Okay, and how they drop out and give this necessity here can be shown in a few steps. So if this is a simple conditional analysis, then it's the case that necessarily if some x instantiates p, the potency p here, then x is disposed to give the manifestation m in response to s. Now in the first step, if this is true and I insert the conditional analysis here, then necessarily if x instantiates p, then counterfactually if x would also instantiate s, the stimulus, then x would m. Now, and given that this is true in a world W, that p that x instantiates p and it instantiates x, then x m's. Now, okay, and from this it follows the following follows: if x instantiates p and s, then x m's, and from that it follows follows 5 in world W that for all x, if x instantiates s, p and x instantiates s, then x would m. And there we are at the universal regularity. So that's how we, circumvent the inductive inference. Looks fine. So we've done it. So this is a short version of how BERT gets to universal regularities on the basis of dispositions. So in BERT, it's a bit, it's more complicated. This is an easy version given by Jag and Schrenk in their book Naturgesetze. Okay, now what are the prospects? And here's another quote by Brian Ellis, which gives us hope. And here he says, scientific essentialism promises to transform our thinking about scientific rationality and the theory of inductive reasoning. If one believes, as Hume did, that all events are loose and separate, then the problem of induction is probably insoluble. Anything could happen. But if one thinks that, as scientific essentialists do, that the laws of nature are immanent in the world and depend on the essential natures of things, then there are strong constraints on what could possibly happen. And he thinks that this is an answer to the problem of induction. Okay, let's explore this for a while. Now there is a serious threat for dispositionalism, and that is also the problem of the inference problem. The inference problem is, as I already said, we have this inference, abductive inference, a fact asking for explanation. We infer that, and now we have to draw this inference to the best explanation, but it's the inference problem say stop. Here's something flawed. You can't go from here to there. That's the inference problem formally. And it has initially been raised by Barker and Smart and by Jag. And it says now in the Birdian picture, the laws are something that come from second order facts. Second order facts which say that there is a property G and a property H which are related as disposition and manifestation. And in Bird's account, this is a second order fact. It's a fact that the disposition G gives rise to the behavior H, that it manifests in behavior H. And this is a second order fact. On the first order level, there are these instantiations, the states of affairs, however you would like to call them, the facts. And but now, if this is the case, the problem arises as to how can those second order relations between dispositions and their manifestations, if they are second order facts, how can they necessitate the behavior of the first order facts? something else needs to be said here. How the dispositional structure kind of gets implemented on the first order level. And this is exactly the same problem that Armstrong faces, actually. He has here the necessitation relation between, the universals, and he claims, since these are universals, and if something instantiates the universal, then the relation must also hold. But it's questionable of how this can be. How is it possible? Bach and Smart say, but in virtue of what does this necessitation between the second order fact and the first order patterns of tendency hold? Something needs to be given here, a law-like relation or whatever. Now, dispositionalists have tried to solve this problem, and they gave several alternative theories to Bird's account to avoid his structural identification criteria for dispositional properties. And there is this powerful qualities view, and there's a qualitative dispositional essentialism, and identity theory of dispositions, and the DM identity theory. So all of these branches of dispositionalism try to tackle the inference problem and try to show how the necessitating force of the dispositional property is not up to some structure or anything, but it's really within the nature of the properties. But now, given as that may be, how can we know that dispositionalism is true? We need to know that it is true if we want to, do something here. And now here are some help, maybe. So we could also argue, we could give some kind of transcendental arguments for dispositional essentialism, for dispositionalism. And here's one variant that I think is very strong. It's the argument from scientific method, and it says as follows. What I would like to have done here is produce a transcendental argument for the existence of causal influences. Such influences, I would like to say, are necessary presuppositions of one of the most useful and successful, and I would suggest essential methods we have for understanding the world. The difficulty, of course, is providing necessity. So it provides necessity only if transcendental arguments are inferences to the only possible explanation. So one has to argue for, that it's the only possible explanation I have for the reductive method in science, and also the reductive method in science has to be a necessary requisite of science. So, and these are kind of strong, strong claims, especially the second one. So. Okay, so we could also go along this route. We could argue by creative abduction from scientific practice, as Andreas Hüttemann does, and say regularities are correlations between actually occurring events, something like this. All events of type F are followed by events of type G. But laws do not only tell us what actually happens, laws tell us furthermore that what might happen and what cannot happen. This modal aspect, I will argue, plays an essential role in understanding how we intervene into the course of nature or fail to be able to do so. Intervention is tied to aspects of scientific practice that the Humean cannot fully explain. The best explanation of our intervention or manipulation practice refers to necessary connections in nature. Yeah, so what Andreas Hüttemann here does is drawing an inference to the best explanation for dispositional modality. So he adds this further thing here, the inference to the best explanation. But okay, that's all fine. But what we have to do before that is to construct the theory. So we do have to have a good theory before we can do an inference to the best explanation. And we are not at that point yet. So probably we need some theory construction. And we could do this maybe in the following way. So the dynamic of a metaphysical theory, so we have theory construction going on, and theories change and improve. So how can we account of that? It could be modeled analogous to scientific theory dynamics generally. So we could rely on and say, you know, metaphysics evolves kind of analogous to how scientific theories evolve. And since we are kind of successful in that, we could draw a metaphysical meta-induction, meta-inductive proof of dispositionalism here. And we could take, let's take, for instance, Lakatos' model of theory revision. And then we could say, okay, we need this thesis of immunity and distinguish between core and periphery, the core and the periphery of the theory, and and think, we should keep to the core assumptions that there are dispositions and the like. That's the core of the theory, and make changes only in the periphery. For instance, give up on the structural definition of the dispositional properties and have some story as how the necessity comes from the dispositional properties themselves. Okay, and then we need these, in Lakatos' model, the CP thesis. We have to give those exclusive CP hypotheses as aiding hypotheses to get from the theorems to empirical hypotheses, or to explanatory hypotheses. So, and if we do this, we can make changes with respect to these hypotheses. So that's how we can, adjust the theory, to optimize it. So this would be, my initial thought of theory optimization in metaphysics. Okay, and we need also some modeling here, and that's what we do in our research group, Inductive Metaphysics. We look at the empirical sciences and several empirical sciences, and try to get information about how the properties in these sciences have to be interpreted in concerning the properties, and get information about models of dispositionalism, how to, what we need here. For instance, and we talked about that last week in a conference on the life sciences, dispositions in the life sciences. For instance, biologists have this property of stemness, the property of some cells to be stem cells, and this property is connected to some potentialities here. And as a colleague of mine, Suarez Diaz, thinks, we need, for instance, extrinsic dispositions. Okay, so we have to integrate extrinsic dispositions. Okay, so there are several features of dispositionalism, single or multi-track, intrinsicness, extrinsicness, determinable, determinates, so on, and we fit that according to what the sciences kind of give us of information, what we find in nature, how dispositions are empirically like, according to our now ongoing science. But we do have problem with the the first problem is, would the uniformity principle hold if dispositionalism were true? Just pretend that dispositionalism is true. Is that enough? Is this really enough? And think of Goodman's riddle of induction and those gruesome properties. And that's really a problem, is it? Just think, if dispositionalism were true, we still would have to make further assumptions that the whole furniture of our properties is kind of fixed in the end. There is this kind of set of properties, and in our world, it's a more or less fixed set. If we don't have that, then we get into trouble with this one. If new properties are being instantiated or old properties vanish and new ones come up, even if we have necessary dispositional laws, we are in trouble with the problem of induction. The second problem is which condition must be met that we know that dispositionalism is true. So I was saying about theory optimization and so on, and that's pretty fine, but it only gives us, a probability here. It doesn't give us what we need. So there has to be a more or less clear result in the end if we then, after I construe the theory, and even if it is really, it fits the phenomena really fine and everything, but there has to be some result in the end. But but when is that? When is that point reached? If the time has come, not before the whole pattern of events is laid out to us, whatever that might mean, dispositionalism even might converge with Humanism, because the pattern then is just there. It's the vast collection of properties and their patterns and everything. So if we have to wait until the end of time, probably, or some point very late, if we do have to wait until that time, the only thing that dispositional gives us then, that we can explain why it's, so reliable in each and every instance, but, it's basically kind of concerning the facts it converges. Now the consequences, and that's my last slide. Now dispositionalism is a powerful tool to explain many phenomena of the sciences, those that sciences deals with, as well as those that science provides itself, so the scientific practices and so on. It would also be a powerful tool to deal with a metaphysical problem of induction. However, its success depends on its overall theoretical merits in competition to other accounts. Those that we have, and that might still come up, there might still also come up other theories up. So there's one reason to have good hope, at least. The persistence of dispositionalism through history, that's at least something, we find dispositionalism, a dispositionalist account in Aristotle, and it was kind of, very persistent in history. So at least it's not an argument, Possibly this is due to our cognitive apparatus in dealing with the world. And now the argument comes. So probably, and the Kantian turn, probably there's a powerful transcendental argument still to be found without too strong Kantian presuppositions in making a claim that kind of our cognitive apparatus that is a condition for making sense out of the ongoing things in nature, that they kind of dispose us towards dispositionalism because that's just what they are like, And if we could make a transcendental argument out of that it's kind of the nature of our cognitive apparatus to deal conceptual-wise with respect to our concepts in this way, then we could know that dispositionalism is true. Okay, so thanks.